Welcome to KRWG's District 2 Republican Forum. I'm Edmundo Resendez. Tuesday, June 5th is primary day in New Mexico. 5 candidates are vying for the Republican nomination for District 2, the seat currently held by Republican Steve Pearce. Here are the candidates vying for the nomination: Clayburn Griffin, State Representative Yvette Herrell, Jack Volpato, Monty Newman, and Professor Gavin Clarkson. The rules for this forum are very simple. Each candidate will be asked a series of questions based on the following topics: the economy, immigration and border security, the budget, and the rule of government. Each candidate will get 90 seconds to respond to each question. At the end of the forum, each candidate will get a 2-minute closing statement. With that, let us begin. Clayburn Griffin, why are you the best candidate to represent the Republican Party in the general election?
Thank you, Edmundo. Thank you for putting on this forum, and I'd like to thank the other candidates as well for their participation. I'm the best candidate because, times right now, regular working Americans are simply being ignored. I understand that government needs real reform across the board, and that's what I want to bring, and that's why I'm running right now. I think President Trump's election, we saw that he spoke to a large portion of America that was simply being ignored by a broken system that's not listening to them and their needs. We saw a groundswell of support for President Trump, and even on the left, we saw it for Bernie Sanders. And I think that this was people standing up and deciding to say, finally, enough is enough. They've had it with a broken system. So also, President Trump becoming elected, I think that showed that you don't have to be a career politician to change the system. In fact, in many ways, I think not being a career politician helps you enable that change that our country most needs. I'm running because I want to give voice to regular working people who have long been ignored by politics as usual in this country. It's just simply not working for regular, hardworking Americans out there. And I'm running because I want to put an end to politics as usual, and I want to put New Mexico first.
Yvette Herrell, same question.
Great, thank you for the question, and thank you also for hosting us today. I really believe I am the right candidate for this position because I'm the only one coming into this race with legislative experience. People don't have to wonder where I stand on issue because I have 8 years of a track record that shows where I stand, and everybody knows I'm definitely pro-God, pro-life, pro-business, pro-gun, and pro-family. And actually, I'm pro-Trump since day one of his election. That's not something I just decided to do. I've stood in support of our president in building the wall, tax reform, our veteran situation. But I really appreciate this opportunity because I bring a different passion. The people of New Mexico are the reason for my wanting to run. This is something I've wanted to do for several years. So I've worked effectively outside of my House district, not only to be a better leader on the state level, but to be able to transition into this position when this day came. And I think understanding the nuances of this district, the industries, the people, the education crisis that we're facing, really bring my strength to the forefront. And I'm very excited about the opportunity to work with the relationships that I already have developed in Washington in terms of this administration and their cabinet level folks, my ability to work across the aisle. I have a proven track record, and just the excitement overall of being the voice of New Mexico, because I don't think we've seen our true potential. And I believe in the America First agenda, and we can make New Mexico first again for the first time. But I've got to be the person to carry that voice. So thank you.
Jack?
Thank you for hosting this again. I believe I'm the best candidate because I have a very diverse background. And in this district, there is a diverse a bunch of people. And I think I can best represent them because, number one, I'm a healthcare professional. I'm a pharmacist. I'm a small businessman. I own 2 pharmacies of myself. I'm self-made. I started with nothing, and I've become successful. I think that's part of the American dream, and I want to help the southern New Mexico voters help that dream come true for themselves. Also, I believe with my background in agriculture, I own 2 farms, and I have a ranch up in northern New Mexico with my family. And I understand agriculture, and I understand the problems with it and the overregulation of the federal government on certain areas such as grazing restrictions and the restrictions on dairy industries. I also was a county commissioner for 8 years until I termed out, twice serving as chairman And I believe that I understand how local government responds, and I want to take that passion and turn it into the national debate. Right now, I am currently working with the county and the city, representing them with the WIP site, and I go to Washington and help get the budget set for the WIP site and for also another nuclear project. So I'm very familiar with going back there. I also worked on the sinkhole project, which just got finished.
Mr. Newman.
I want to thank KRWG for the invitation and for the opportunity for all of us to visit with the public today regarding our candidacy. I think one of the unique things that I bring is my breadth and depth of experience. I've been married to my wife Vicki for 43 years. We have 2 sons. One's a veteran of the Iraq War. One's a graduate of New Mexico State University. I've been fortunate enough to own and operate a small business for 30 years. Have also been a city commissioner, along with being the elected mayor of Hobbs from 2004 to 2008. Have some education experience on the board of trustees for New Mexico Junior College, which I served as chair for 7 years, plus a long history in my profession of real estate, where I've been able to serve for one of the largest trade associations in the country as Vice President Liaison to Government Affairs for a membership of 1.3 million people. I think given both my public and my private experience within the marketplace makes me uniquely qualified to be the next congressman from the 2nd Congressional District. Thank you.
Professor Clarkson.
Edmundo, thank you. As I listen to the good folks sitting here at the table, I remain convinced that I am the only candidate in the race with the energy to empower New Mexico. And my 3 E's for the land of enchantment: economic expansion, empowerment, and enforcement. I'm the only Trump official in the race, and I'm the only candidate who has been sworn in to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States twice. Once 30 years ago when I was inducted to the United States Navy, and once last year when President Trump brought me up from New Mexico to serve as his Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy and Economic Development. I'm the only tribal member in the race with a quarter-century of experience in tribal economic development. And that's worth an extra 7 points in November. That was Steve Pierce's consistent strategy, and that's my strategy as well. I'm the only school teacher in the race, and I'm the only committed pro-lifer in the race with decades-long experience in empowering women to make the choice for life. Y yo soy el único candidato que puede entregar el mismo mensaje en español. And that's worth another 10 points in November. I am the only economic development professional in the race with a proven track record of bringing $750 million to rural America and New Mexico. I'm the only candidate to release an economic development and energy expansion plan. The swamp is deep, the alligators bite, fake news is really annoying, and the taxpayers are getting ripped off every single day, and I am the only candidate with a plan to enforce government accountability. The Democrats are targeting this seat, and I am the only battle-tested swamp warrior who can guarantee that we never hear the words Speaker Pelosi ever again.
Yvette Herrell, what is your position on border security and the expansion of the border wall?
That's a great question, and I think it's one that's very important to New Mexico, especially given our proximity to the border. I definitely support building the wall. I think that's just key in terms of securing the border security and helping with the immigration issue. That's something that President Trump has talked about, something I certainly stand for. And I also support the SMART Wall, which is Congressman Hurd's bill. It's the SMART Act, which utilizes new technology, drones, puts private sector people to work as well as government folks. But it gives us an opportunity to utilize technology and private sector. I think this could be a good bridge of the gap, if you will, while we're waiting to see this wall get built. But I totally support the idea of having the wall built, creating a safeguard for New Mexicans and the country as a whole. I also think it will help with stopping some of the traffic coming across the border. This is something that's important to our security, not only our state security, but national security. I think we need to get to work on the wall and support the president.
Jack?
I also feel strongly about building the wall. I don't think it's the complete answer, though. I do believe that we need a bigger presence on the border, and I think we need to triple the amount of border control agents and border security agents along the wall, along with employing drones and sensor technology. I do not believe that the private sector should be involved in border security. I think that we can do it as a federal government agency as far with the Border Patrol. We need to also change the way our laws are written such that anybody that's being a coyote or a human trafficker, that carries a mandatory life sentence with it if they're convicted of trafficking humans. Also, I believe the same thing for drug trafficking. If you're trafficking drugs in humans, you should get a mandatory life sentence when convicted.
Monty?
I firmly believe that one of the government's priorities is the defense and the securing of its borders. I stand with President Trump on the wall. I believe the wall needs to be built in areas where, in fact, it makes sense. I agree that technology can be used in ways today that we've never seen before. I believe in aerial surveillance, in increasing of Border Patrol agents along the border. I think it's critical to both our safety and to our national defense. So I do stand in favor of the wall and what it means to New Mexicans as we border to the south, and with all protections of all of our borders, whether by land or by sea. Thank you.
I supported President Trump's position on the wall from the moment he announced his candidacy, because border security for southern New Mexico is about public safety as well as about immigration control. My chief of staff is the child of Mexican farm workers. His family followed the rules, came here legally. He was a Special Forces veteran. His younger brother was also in the Army, came home on leave, and got killed by a drunk driver who had been deported 4 times. My son was in a hit-and-run accident on his bicycle, and I was almost killed by an illegal alien drunk driver. So public safety is critically important. We need to not just build the wall, we do need to build a high-tech wall. And some of my supporters are already working with me to develop a plan to not only use the wall to keep us safe, but to also use that as an economic development potential for southern New Mexico, because most of the areas south of I-10 don't have adequate high-speed broadband. And if we need to have eyes on the wall with motion detectors and radar and ground penetrating radar and infrared and all the things that we need to keep our country safe, that's going to require a high-tech infrastructure, and the local communities in southern New Mexico can piggyback off of that high-tech infrastructure for economic expansion possibilities. So the other thing is, when the Democrats refer to me as a racist for advocating for and following the rules, I'm the only candidate that can whip out my Indian card and respond in Spanish that la mitad de mis compañeros en esta campaña son hijos y nietos de inmigrantes legales.
Clayburn?
Obviously, border security is an important issue. However, the idea that a wall is going to solve the problem is misguided. When President Trump was first running on this notion and saying that he was going to build a wall, I think a lot of people, including myself, believe that he was speaking more metaphorically and trying to perhaps get the conversation to border security and about increasing resources, and that he didn't literally mean an actual wall across the entire border, because frankly, that's a simplistic solution to a very complex problem. I am glad that I heard Ms. Herrell mention smart wall technology, and Professor Clarkson also talked a little bit about that, and that's really where the real solution lies. We can't just build a giant concrete barrier and expect for drugs and crime to stay out. We need to make sure that we're investing in smart, efficient security measures, such as sensors, ground sensors, blimps, balloons, infrared cameras, night vision cameras, AI tracking software as well, so that we can make better use of the people on the ground there. And we also have to invest, of course, in the actual Border Patrol agents there on the ground, because that's what's going to provide actual security. A wall is a nice idea, and for certain parts of it, it might have some benefits, but as a one-size-fits-all solution, it's not practical, and it's extremely expensive.
Jack Volpato, what would comprehensive immigration reform look like if you designed it?
I think that what we do is we let people come to the United States on work visas and student visas and then we let them go through the immigration process. I think that's backwards. I think we need to vet people before they get here. We need to have centers of immigration in other countries that we feel that are safe and we want them to immigrate from. For example, put one in Mexico at the border at Juarez, or somewhere down in central Mexico or Guatemala, and have these immigration centers and basically have people apply for immigration there and basically have them vetted before they ever cross our borders, before they ever got a student visa or a work visa, so that we know what we're getting. You know, the Bracero program back in the 60s was also a very successful program as far as work visas, and people were identified and they knew where they were, and they came back to the United States on the seasonal work exchange. I think that we need to be mindful of the fact that, you know, the times have changed, but yet we can still go to that sort of a program, but yet vet them before they come to our borders. I think we do things backwards right now. We let them come to our country, and then we start the vetting process, and then the citizenship process. That should start on the other side of the border.
Monty?
First of all, I believe in an immigration system that works for the country because I think immigration into our country is paramount to our success. I believe that the system should be legal and should be adhered to. I personally favor a merit-based system in the country. I don't believe that chain migration or the visa lottery system is working for the country. One of our significant problems in the country today is visa overstays. And in an environment where we have technology and the ability, visa overstays should not be occurring in the country at the rate that they are. My personal view is that it should be merit-based. I think that the needs of the country and its citizenry should come first. I think that's first and foremost in any application of immigration law that we have in this country. There is no doubt this country was built through immigration. It's expanded and it's grown to its greatness through immigration. And I believe in a strong immigration, legal immigration policy within the country.
Professor Clarkson.
I stand firmly with President Trump with the notion that immigration has to be based on what is in the best interest of America. We have to be putting Americans first. So we need to make sure that the rule of law applies, and it also has to apply to Democrats even if they don't like the outcome. We have to be a nation of laws, and that means that people need to follow the rules. For the folks that are working in my campaign, many of them, it took them 15 years to get their legal residency or their U.S. citizenship. Why on earth we would let people who cheated or would let people whose parents cheated, let them jump to the head of the line? That's just simply wrong. We need to follow the rules. When my students cheat, I fail them. They don't get the prize at the end. The same thing should be the case with immigration. Now, dreamers who served honorably in the military, I would be willing to make an exception for, but those aren't the ones we're worried about. We're worried about the cartel members, the human smugglers, the people who are a danger to good-working, hard-working Americans. And let me be clear, a lot of the supporters, as we've gone door to door throughout the neighborhoods here in southern New Mexico, more than half of my supporters are Latinos, and their families follow the rules, and they don't like people who cheat. So I think Monty's correct. We should absolutely stand with the president, repeal chain migration, repeal the visa lottery, but we shouldn't have an amnesty. We shouldn't have a path to citizenship. Maybe we can have a path to residency for those people who make sense for the American economy.
Clayburn.
We have to fix the immigration system because right now, as Professor Clarkson referenced, a lot of people are taking 15 years or so just to get through the legal process. So obviously when you have a system that's so broken as to take 15 years just for somebody to come to this country and join their parents or their children or cousins, whoever it might be, that's going to result in this black market of smuggling people across the border. Professor Clarkson said, you know, that these immigrants are families, and he made this appeal that he does care about them, and yet he's taking a very strict stance on wanting to essentially send them back away from their families and tear families apart. And I think when we have that conversation, we're creating a distraction from the real problems with border security. And right now, too, resources are going toward we spend about $1 billion, I think, a year detaining and apprehending families, working families, and sending them back. Whenever what we want to be focusing on is crime and drugs and human trafficking. And so we have to fix the immigration system to make it easier for good people, working people to come here. And I think it's disingenuous to call this chain migration when what it really is families rejoining each other. And I think that we are supposed to be the party of family values, and to be a party that's tearing families apart is disgraceful.
Ms. Herrell?
Well, there's no doubt that there is an issue nationally, but It's true. America has to come first, and what we have to protect is New Mexico from becoming a sanctuary state. We can't let short-term fixes like DACA become long-term solutions, because it doesn't work that way. We need a Congress that's going to act and take action. We need to give the Border Patrol the tools they need, but we also need to be looking at the laws that are on the book and enforcing them. And it has become such a huge issue, and it's become more divisive than it is uniting us. But it's something we have to address. We cannot afford as a state or a nation to pay for the medical, the schooling, and other necessities that illegals are taking away from our taxpayers and from our veterans, more importantly. So we have to look at revising the law, enforcing the law, and quit trying to get away from utilizing a short-term fix for a long-term solution. We have to get rid of the chain migration. There's no doubt about it. We have to instill a program that'll allow people who want to move to our nation and go through the process legally, let them do so, but to let them into this nation and take advantage of the assets that we have here, the programs we have here, is wrong on every level, and we have to put America first.
Monty Newman, name 2 specific actions the government can take to reduce gun violence in America.
2 specific actions. First of all, reinforce the family and family values. I would tell you that mental health is a critical component of this, whether a person's schizophrenic or whether they're bipolar. Some people are over-medicated. I think our processes that we go through in securing areas where our children go to school are paramount to be considered. You know, my wife was a school teacher and taught kids for over 25 years. I'm a grandfather. I have a 12-year-old daughter that walks to school and that goes to school every day, and a 4-year-old grandson that will be going into kindergarten next year. So my fears as a grandfather and as a father watching my kids grow up or watching my wife go to school are the same as every other parent or every other spouse or grandparent in this country. We owe our children safety. That's first and foremost. If I'm entering a school and I shouldn't be there, someone should be there to greet me to find out what my purpose is for being there. I don't have all the answers to secure every site. I know I go to football games and I get checked, go through a magnetometer before I enter the field to find my seat. Government can't solve these kind of problems. We can manage a process, but our ability to solve problems as a government has been hard to find at times.
Professor Clarkson.
Well, unfortunately, the situation in Florida was tragic, but the standard leftist reaction was to ban all guns, and that's clearly wrong. The only way you stop a bad guy with a gun is with a good guy with a gun. And the only way you're going to be able to get people to respond quicker is to make sure those with the good guys with the guns can be on site and be on scene first. And so I support concealed carry in the classroom for a select set of teachers and administrators. I'm the only school teacher in the race. I am the only one who's been confronted by students who are out of control. And fortunately, it happened in a parking lot where I was able to have my .357 nearby in my truck. But when I'm in the classroom here at New Mexico State, I have to leave my .357 locked away in my truck. And who would be the likely first responder, assuming I can get to a phone to call the police should we have an active shooter situation on campus? So there are a number of communities that are responding this week with Sheriff Sentinels programs so that we can have concealed carry to protect the innocent in the classroom, because that means that the schools will not be a soft target anymore. But we also need to deal with the crisis of hope that leads to these kind of situations. When there aren't any good jobs, when there's no hope of private employment, when our young men, and most often it's young men, don't feel like they have any hope, that is something where if we can create a vibrant economy and create an opportunity for hope, we can reach out to these young men and show them that there is something more to look for.
Clayburn?
Professor Clarkson said that, the only thing that can stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And I think responsible gun owners know that that isn't entirely accurate, because I know plenty of good people who I simply wouldn't trust with a gun because they're irresponsible, they have poor aim. There are a lot of reasons that you wouldn't want just a good person with a gun out adding to what's happening out there. So I think responsible gun owners, we understand that guns are powerful, that they are killing machines, and that you have to have respect for that power. And I know that in my own family, my parents had taught me how to have that respect for guns. And I think that we as a nation can have a respect for guns without having to take away guns or greatly inhibit your ability to get guns, but we can have some sensible changes to gun policy. I was happy to see President Trump suggest that he's open to extended background checks. I think another important thing that we could look at is simply allowing the CDC to research the problem, because it's not necessarily all about guns. There are some cultural elements as well, as Mr. Newman touched on. I think there's a wide variety of problems that are leading to these mass shootings that we have, that it's become an epidemic, and we need to allow the research to happen so we can have the facts and come to an understanding of what are our best options for stopping this, because it's a disgrace that we let this continue.
Ms. Herrell.
Well, there's no doubt about it. There's an epidemic. There's a problem. But I agree with Monty. I believe it starts at home. I think the way we're raising our children now, we have moved so far away from family values and biblical principles. We have a culture that is so immune to violence. We see it every day in the movies, on TV, everywhere. And it's not that we don't have a responsible segment of gun ownership here in this country. It's the fact that we have a behavioral health issue. We have people who don't care anymore, who are, quite frankly, not in touch with reality, because we have allowed so many things to impede on everyone's lives. We see the government taking over. It's not working. We see Hollywood taking over. This is having such a profound effect on the way that we think and do things. And we can't pass legislation just to pass it. I mean, we have to protect the Second Amendment. That is a right, not a privilege. I think the idea of possibly looking into expanding background checks might be a great idea, but really where it needs to start is at home. And we need to allow concealed carry personnel, teachers to be at the schools and other places. These gun-free zones are not gun-free for the shooter. And it's tragic that it happens, and my heart goes out to the families, but we can't legislate this. We can't fix this without coming back to a common sense and a commonality, and that's putting the responsible gun ownership first, and then looking at how we can improve educating our kids.
Jack?
Thank you. Mass shootings basically fall into two categories. You have either terrorist activity or we have a behavioral or mental health issue. The terrorist activity can best be solved by improving our vetting and security, and also giving our FBI and CIA the tools needed to identify and find these people before they can act. I think sometimes we hamstring our own agencies in certain areas, and we need to allow them to do what they need to do to find the terrorist cells or the people that are here and are terrorists and waiting to strike. On the other side, behavioral health, we do a terrible job of behavioral health and getting behavioral health services to our people, especially down here in our district, southern New Mexico. There are very few behavioral health areas or treatment centers in CD2. We really need to expand those, and we need to get more people here. We also need to improve the Sentinel system in identifying people that could be problems to society. And we also need facilities to put those people to get treatment, to get them out of society where they cannot do harm to others. As far as concealed carry, me and my wife is a principal at a DD preschool, and she's had several instances where the police were called to her school. I said, you know what, you really need to start carrying your pistol to school.
Mr. Clarkson, how would you gain congressional support for economic development along the border?
Well, first we'll start by getting funding for the wall, because the wall is a mechanism for economic development in southern New Mexico, because we'll make it a high-tech wall. Second, we need to expand the use of new market tax credits in southern New Mexico. Most of our census tracts here in southern New Mexico are eligible, yet we've had a very, very poor track record of attracting that outside capital. We also need to pass national right to work legislation. New Mexico continuously gets passed over for companies that want to relocate here, but the moment they determine that we're not right to work, then they just pass us over. We could certainly do that nationally. There are national initiatives that will make it so that workers have the freedom whether or not they want to choose a union or not, and that will attract business and that will gain more economic opportunity here. The other thing we need to do is in the tax bill, we eliminated dual taxation on job creators in the international context, but unfortunately we still left dual taxation in place on job creators here in New Mexico. And so one of the things I can do on day one, and this is something I worked out when I was at the Department of Interior, on day one we'll be able to introduce legislation to eliminate dual taxation on job creators, particularly the job creators that want to come onto our Indian reservations here in the 2nd Congressional District. And if there's any concern from the folks in Santa Fe that can't seem to spend the money wisely and that they're afraid they might lose out on all this free money they're getting from the Indian reservations, well, we can fix that. Because I'm a former Trump official, I put America first, and that means putting first Americans ahead of foreign interests. So if there's any concern that state governments might have any short-term tax discontinuities, because the data is very clear that in the long run they're going to make so much more money when we pump billions of dollars. This is $40 billion nationwide. This is $2 billion just for New Mexico. Because I'm a Trump official, if the states are worried, we'll just legislate that we'll pull any discontinuities from foreign aid. We shouldn't be sending money to people who burn our flag.
Clayburn?
So I really think we need to diversify our economy. We have to create some future-proof jobs, and the way to do that is getting new industries to set up shop here. That does mean we need pro-business policies to bring those industries here. Particularly one that I think is on the horizon for us is going to be aerospace. As we've seen recently, SpaceX put a Tesla up in orbit, and the private space flight industry is going to be huge. And so we as New Mexico, we have a great history of innovation, particularly in rocketry with the things that Goddard has done with the Manhattan Project in White Sands. This is something that we should easily call our own. And right now on the border in Mexico, a lot of the automotive factories are looking forward to how are they going to become aerospace factories. They have automotive engineers right now who are making that shift to aerospace engineering. And we on the other side of the border should be able to complement that industry. So trade with Mexico is vital to our local economy here, because the trade that's happening across the border right now, too much of it is going up to places like Iowa and Michigan, whereas we're right here just across the border. Aside from just getting these little tangential benefits, we should be more closely involved with Mexico on the production of things like aerospace flight and certainly automotives.
Ms. Herrell.
I think one thing we can do in New Mexico in terms of bringing economic development is to get rid of overregulation and overtaxing policies. We need to really embrace free market enterprise. One thing we can do for our ranchers and farmers that produce, and we have quite a good and healthy ag industry in New Mexico, but we need to look at the H-2A policies that Chairman Goodlatte has done, that brings flexibility and the ability for our ranchers, farmers, dairymen to hire guest workers. We need to look at that guest worker program. We also need to look at the regulations that are prohibitive for New Mexicans to be not able to compete with foreign producers when it relates to produce. We also need to expand the gas and oil opportunities. We can put production plants in New Mexico. Instead of sending oil and gas to other states to be processed, we can do those things here. We can create jobs here. We can create a better opportunity for businesses to come to New Mexico, and the right to work is an important thing, but that's a state issue that we need to address on the state level. I know counties are addressing it now, but we need to be able to get rid of the regulation that prohibits our industries from reaching their true potential, from bringing home the monies that we need, not only in our general fund, but to the country as a whole. Because as we create jobs, taxes are increased. I mean, revenues are increased everywhere. But what we have to do is get rid of the regulation. We have to embrace a free market opportunity.
Jack?
One of the things we need to do is we need to renegotiate NAFTA. NAFTA is over a 20-year-old document, and times have changed and economic realities have changed. I think we need to go back to the board with Mexico and Canada and look at this document and see, is it in the best interest of the United States? Is it in the best interest of New Mexico? I believe that it's not at this point, and we need to change that so that we can get some advantage out of that. However, also I believe that, as Yvette has said, we also need to cut down federal regulation. The dairy industries are being crippled, and the price of milk is going up, and the profits are really being stretched thin with the dairy industries. The BLM and their overgrazing regulations, and also their methane rule, which hampers the ability to produce oil and gas in our area. And as we know, in the southeastern New Mexico, we provide a third of the economy's budget for the state in oil and gas production. However, we do not have all the workers that are living there. They commute back and forth between Texas and here because of the economic advantages, and we need to remove those so that we grow and attract and keep workers here in the state of New Mexico and offer our counties more opportunities for gross receipts.
Monty?
As a congressman in New Mexico, one of the most important things that we can do economically is to make sure that we maintain the research and development that occurs within the state at areas like Los Alamos, New Mexico Tech, UNM, New Mexico State University, and White Sands Missile Range. We also have a significant responsibility to make sure that our air bases stay in New Mexico, as they are key and strategic, defensively strategic operations for the country, that they remain here in the state of New Mexico as well. We're looking to now export gas to Mexico. That's a significant economic tool for all of the gas production that can occur out of the state of New Mexico. The expansion and further development of Santa Teresa is very important to the economy of the state of New Mexico. As a federal official, regulations, permitting processes for the development of roads, of infrastructure, are critical that that time frame gets cut down. As President Trump stated in his State of the Union, when it took 1 year basically to get ready to build the Empire State Building, it takes us roughly 10 years just to build a road. Those type of federal restrictions upon business and industry and the development of states has to stop.
Clayburn Griffin, with the recent tax reform, many businesses across the country have come out in favor of the tax reform law. Some have given raises and bonuses to their employees. Is this a good time to increase the national minimum wage?
I don't think we need to do that. I think that what we're seeing now with a little bit more pro-business policies, particularly around taxes, that's happening naturally. And I think what we want to do is make sure that our tax cuts are focused to have effect on real hardworking Americans. I am cautious about this idea of trickle-down economics, and I feel maybe that's a bit misplaced to say, let's give the rich people plenty of tax cuts and then hope that they raise wages and increase more jobs. Why not just give the benefits directly to working Americans? You can give them the tax cuts. So I think when we're talking taxes, we need to make sure that we're prioritizing workers first before the wealthy.
Yvette?
Well, I think that the new tax reform package has been completely helpful for the country, and we've seen great opportunities in New Mexico just because business reinvests in business. This is giving people a bigger paycheck, but do I think it's time nationally for us to look at raising minimum wage? I don't think so. I think it's time in America to start creating the jobs that have gone overseas, bringing them back. I think it's time to build a stronger America and create more jobs, and I believe that private sector industries have the ability to regulate themselves as it relates to how are they paying and how much are they paying. That should depend on experience, pay scales, what people bring to the table, bonus structures, all kinds of things. But I don't think that government should be getting involved any more than they already are. In fact, we need less government and more private sector, but I don't think that raising the minimum wage is something we need to do right now. I think what we can do is create jobs and opportunities for people to put folks to work, and that in itself will take care of the issue.
Jack?
First and foremost, I don't think we need to raise the minimum wage because in my neck of the woods, we basically cannot pay the minimum wage because nobody will work for it. Our economy is super hot. We have more jobs than we have workers. And I do not pay, as a small businessman, I do not pay any of my workers minimum wage. They get far better than that. And when we got when the new tax breaks came along, we passed those on to our workers and gave them raises. We also help use some of that money to offset the premiums that we have to pay for their insurance, which had gone up 30% this year and had gone up 20% the year before. we basically help offset that so that the workers would not have to eat that. We also are looking at expanding operations. I think that this, the tax breaks is the perfect way to trickle down and grow business, grow jobs, and basically give back to your employees that have been faithful and been hardworking for you. And to say that you have to set a minimum for somewhere else, for the most part, I don't see that it's really needed at this point. If you're going to work hard, you'll get a good salary.
Monty.
Personally, I believe that good economies and demand set the pay scale. I don't believe that a blanket policy by the federal government that blankets the land is good policy for every community within the state of New Mexico or any other community in any other state. When communities are solid and their economies are working well, people actually do better than minimum wage. I would argue that some communities that increase their minimum wage, in fact, have no economy. And just because you create an incentive or an increase in the minimum wage does not mean that it will improve your economy. As a matter of fact, it's assured basically to drive costs up and business out, which is just absolutely the opposite of the desired effect that you want within your local communities. I'm one that believes communities should, in fact, compete. I believe that states should, in fact, compete. And if we do those things as American citizens, the issue of minimum wage or a working wage begin to go to the side. Because in fact, economies are growing, people are productive, demand for employment is high, which drives the cost of labor up, which means that products can be sold at higher prices and can in fact be afforded.
Gavin.
Well, as the only person who was in the Trump administration when the tax bill was being worked out, I want to thank President Trump and the Republican Congress for passing the tax reform, because it clearly demonstrates the need for maintaining a Republican majority. And that's why it's important for me to be the candidate on November, because I'm the strongest candidate to make sure that President Trump has a Republican Congress to continue to work on agenda items like tax reform. Now, to your specific question about minimum wage, I was meeting with Rand Paul last week, and he has this notion that many of these ideas that come out, they're sort of dinosaur-brained ideas, in that they come out from people with big hearts but really small brains. Because minimum wage actually hurts the very people that it is intended to help. African American youth are damaged by minimum wage. Hispanic youth are damaged by minimum wage because they get priced out of the market and people will reduce their workforce, and therefore you're going to have all these unemployed teenagers, and those are the very folks that we're trying to supposedly help with minimum wage. So I think Monty's got a good point, that I think communities and economies and business should compete. And a minimum wage, this would be the absolute worst time to raise the minimum wage. And if you look at all the tofu-snorting leftist cities, Seattle and wherever, that have raised their minimum wage to $15 an hour, it's been a disaster for American Indian youth, for Hispanic youth, and for African American youth. Raising the minimum wage is the worst thing you can do if you actually care about poor people.
I want to thank you each for answering the questions. Time now for closing statements. Clayburn Griffin, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Edmundo. You know, I've been hearing here on this panel a lot of things that kind of make me a bit uneasy. I feel that we're perhaps oversimplifying a lot of issues, and I think that tends to be the problem with politics as usual, because it becomes about winning a race. It becomes about those nice sounding sound bites, catchy sound bites. When you get down to actually governing though, it's a little more nuanced than that. And so whenever I hear people saying, this is going to solve this and this is going to solve that, they're wrong. It's just not going to be that simple. It's not that cut and dry. And too often what ends up happening is simply you have the left saying this, the right saying that, and they're just constantly arguing with each other. And meanwhile, no work actually gets done, and the regular working Americans are, again, ignored by the system. So that's something that has to change, and I think electing politicians who are just too busy playing politics and trying to find that catchy soundbite is the wrong way to go about this. And we have to be more responsible as voters and start electing people who are actually going to make a difference, who are actually wanting to tackle the issues and do what's going to work best for regular working Americans. So I really hope that you consider supporting me in this race, because that's what I want to do. I want to go to Washington and I want to fix problems. I want to drain the swamp. I want to support working Americans, because they're being ignored constantly by our system, and that has to change.
Yvette?
Well, thank you for hosting us this afternoon. I think this is a great opportunity for New Mexicans to see who the candidates are. But again, I just have such a passion for the people of New Mexico. Coming into this race with the experience I have as far as legislating and being a part of the state legislature, I understand working across the aisle, understand the needs and the nuances of the state of New Mexico. I have relationships in Washington, D.C. that I think are the right kind of relationships. But more importantly, it's time to put the politics and the pocketbooks to the side and really focus on policy and people. The folks that matter, the folks that are living with decisions that are being made in Washington, D.C. I think living in the heart of CD2 gives me a great opportunity to be able to see the district as a whole, to understand gas and oil, the agriculture industry, the Department of Defense. I mean, Holloman Air Force Base is in my backyard. We are so diverse in this district, and our people are just as diverse as the industries here, but we cannot not have a good, solid, conservative voice in Washington, D.C. I'm excited about being that voice, but I want to approach this like a job interview, because I want people to understand me as a person, my biblical principles, my family values, what I stand for. There is no guesswork with me. People know what they get. They know who I am as a person. They know what I stand for. I have a track record to prove it, and I'm so excited to be the voice of New Mexico in Washington, D.C., and I would just appreciate so much your prayers. I would appreciate your support and obviously your vote, but be praying for our nation, be praying for this race, and I just thank you for this opportunity.
Jack?
I think that with my previous experience of going back to Washington and working on behalf of Carlsbad and Eddy County, I've developed relationships back there with several congressmen and have learned how things work and what doesn't work. And some of the things I would really like to do when I get back there is to get a budget on a timely basis and get back to regular order of Congress. I think Congress has forgotten that we need to pass budgets on a timely manner and not worry about our veterans and for our armed services people to worry whether they're going to get a paycheck or not. We need to pass a budget on time. We also need to start reducing the role of government. We need more of a federalist type government where the states have more power and the federal government is there to assist the states. I think it's completely reversed now, and I think the bureaucrats are terrible at running what we need to do. For example, our federal lands. They need to come back to the states and out west, and in particular here. We as New Mexicans can run our lands better than bureaucrats in Washington, and we need to get them back under our control and our domain. We need to take the benefits of those lands, such as oil and gas exploration. The money doesn't need to go to the federal government. It needs to stay here in New Mexico for schools and roads. You think about what kind of benefit that would be for oil and gas. When you drill it on federal land, 49% of the royalties go to the federal government. What could we do with that here in New Mexico? We could do a lot more. I also believe that I am pro-life. I am Catholic, and I will certainly stand for anything that tries to take that away from the people, and I will certainly not fund Planned Parenthood. I will stand strong to my beliefs.
Monty?
You know, there are a number of issues facing our country today. There really are. And they're important issues. And people have deeply held convictions and emotions about them. But the one thing I absolutely know is that I'm very proud to be an American. I'm proud of who I am. And I'm proud of the country in which I reside, in which I call myself a citizen. There are things that I want to defend. I want to defend your right to liberty. I want to be able to speak for those that are unborn. I want to make sure that the Second Amendment stays in place and that the First Amendment stays in place. I want us to be a constitutional country, a country that understands that society exists because of the rule of law and that good business exists because of the rule of law. I want you to know that I will defend your right to your freedom of religion. When I look at New Mexico, the first thing I should think about every day is how do we create jobs and economic opportunity here? How do we do our best to make sure that we create the atmosphere under which people can be successful, that they can pursue their dreams, that they can in fact live to prosper or choose the path that they want to take for their lives and for their families. That's what makes this country great. It's a place where dreams in fact are made. I'm proud to be a part of it. I want to defend those rights for our men and women serving in the military, serving abroad, whose families stay home, or our first responders who provide safety and security within our communities. For our veterans, thank you for your service. Thank you for your willingness to commit your life to this service. It's greatly appreciated. A lot of blood was shed so that all of us can be up here today to give our points of view. I hope that you would elect me as your next congressman. I look forward to meeting you, and I would ask for your vote.
Kevin.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I appreciate the remarks from all the other candidates. And it's interesting from my perspective because I'm really somewhat of an endangered species. I'm a conservative, Christian, pro-life, pro-gun, pro-right-to-work college professor. And I'm the only one up here who's not a politician or a political operative, and yet I'm the only Trump official sitting here. And in fact, I'm the only Trump energy official sitting here. And my portfolio included significant oil and gas operations, but yet we talk about regulation, yet I'm the only one who forced the deep state bureaucracy to be accountable for the first time in terms of measuring its performance on approving oil and gas drilling permits and fracking operations. I'm also the only candidate here that has a long-term track record of empowering women to make the choice for life, because I'm the only one who ran a crisis pregnancy center. I was chairman of the board, and I did this in Boston, Massachusetts, which is a rather difficult place to be identifiably pro-life. But I want to paint a picture. You know, a lot of people say, well, why are you running? Well, it's actually pretty simple. I looked at the race and I was concerned that we were going to be back in the same situation we were in 2008 when we put a weak candidate on the ballot in November and we got clobbered. And when that happened, we got Speaker Pelosi, we got Obamacare, we got mandatory telework, which rips off the taxpayer to the tune of $1 billion a day. And we can't have that. We can't let that happen. We have to put the strongest candidate on the ballot in November. But the other thing is, my students can't get jobs here in New Mexico. My students graduate. I'm fully in favor of empowering our students with the best education possible, but they graduate and they leave. So the picture I want to paint is, imagine in New Mexico, we raise up our kids, we send them to school, they go off to college, and they come back. And they have good paying jobs, and grandparents can sit there and watch their grandbabies play Little League. That's the New Mexico that I think we all want, and that's the New Mexico I'm willing to fight for. Thank you very much.
I want to thank all the candidates for joining us for this forum, and thank you for watching. To get informed, voting is fundamental to our democracy. If you have not already registered to vote, do so. Primary day is June 5th. Well, it may seem far away. Get this time to know your candidates, to ask them questions, to get answers. Again, thank you for joining us. Have a pleasant week.